Iran is on war alert. US naval assets are amassing in the Arabian Sea, and the alarm bells are ringing for yet another military showdown in West Asia. With daggers already drawn, Iran and the United States are seemingly positioning themselves. Reports are also emerging of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei bunkering down. Here's a report.
Let me start with a question. When a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier suddenly disappears from global tracking systems, do you think that's an accident? Or do you think someone somewhere just decided the talking phase is over? Because that's exactly what just happened. The USS Abraham Lincoln, a floating city powered by nuclear reactors, carrying nearly 90 combat aircraft, crossed key waterways, then deliberately shut off its transponder. That's not a software error. That's what operational intent looks like. In plain English, it means the ship does not want to be seen. And when warships stop wanting to be seen, it usually means someone is getting very nervous on the other side. Let's slow this down. We've all heard tensions are rising before. It's the most overused phrase in global news, but this moment carries a different weight because several dangerous lines are crossing at the same time. Iran is facing internal unrest. Its economy is choking. Its leadership is aging. Its military credibility took a hit last year, and now the world's most powerful navy is quietly moving into position. At the same time, intelligence reports suggest something even more unsettling. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has a plan B, and that plan does not involve staying in Tehran. According to intelligence sources cited by Western outlets, Khamenei has already prepared a fallback escape route if his security forces begin to fracture, if the army hesitates, if the police stop obeying, if the Revolutionary Guard starts questioning orders, he leaves. At 86 years old, Khamenei is not planning a heroic last stand. He's planning survival. The reported destination? Moscow. Not neutral Switzerland, not some quiet Gulf state. Moscow. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because we've seen this movie before. Less than a year ago, Bashar al-Assad, Iran's closest regional ally, fled Syria after decades of rule collapsed. Where did he go? Also, Moscow. Russia has quietly become the world's retirement home for fallen strongmen. When power evaporates, legitimacy dies, and the streets turn hostile, Moscow opens its doors. It's not charity, it's strategy. Here's the key point most headlines miss. Leaders don't plan escape routes when they feel confident. They plan escape routes when they're afraid their own system might turn on them. Reports describe Khamenei as increasingly isolated, physically weaker, and deeply paranoid since last year's conflict with Israel. During that war, while Iranian commanders were being eliminated one by one, he reportedly spent long periods underground, hidden in bunkers, not giving speeches, not rallying the nation, hiding. That kind of behavior doesn't project strength, it projects survival instinct. Meanwhile, protests continue across Iranian cities, driven by inflation, economic collapse, and frustration with repression. Demonstrators accuse security forces of using live fire, tear gas, and brutal force. And yes, Khamenei technically commands all of them, but command on paper and loyalty in the streets are not the same thing. History is full of leaders who learned that lesson too late. As if Iran's internal pressure wasn't enough, Israel is watching closely, and Israel is not known for patience when it feels cornered. According to multiple sources, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already discussed the possibility of future strikes on Iran with US President Donald Trump. The message was blunt. If Iran rebuilds what was destroyed last year, Israel is prepared to act again. Trump's response was equally direct. If Iran tries to rebuild its nuclear program, the United States will destroy it again. Now, that's where things get tricky, because the argument isn't just about nuclear enrichment anymore. Israeli intelligence is increasingly focused on ballistic missiles, not centrifuges. Why? Because missiles are fast, mobile, and harder to neutralize completely. Before last year's war, Iran reportedly possessed around 3,000 ballistic missiles. After the conflict, that number dropped to roughly 1/500, with many launchers destroyed. That was a serious blow. But intelligence agencies now see early signs of rebuilding. Missile production restarting, launchers being repaired, air defense systems slowly coming back online. Israeli officials estimate that, left unchecked, Iran could eventually produce up to 3,000 missiles per year. That's not a theoretical threat. That's a math problem with terrifying answers. One former Israeli official put it plainly: we can dominate the skies. We can do more damage to Iran than Iran can do to us. But missiles are different. We can't stop them all. And that's the fear. Let's rewind. In the early hours of June 13, 2025, Israel launched one of the most aggressive military operations in its history. Within hours, more than 200 fighter jets carried out multiple strike waves, hitting nuclear facilities, missile bases, air defenses, and command centers across Iran. At the same time, covert operations on the ground sabotaged air defense systems from within. Precision weapons were already in place. Drone bases were already established. Air superiority was achieved quickly. In the first 24 hours alone, over 40 Iranian air defense systems were destroyed. Senior commanders were killed. Nuclear scientists eliminated. Missile launchers wiped out. Iran later admitted losing dozens of high-ranking officers and key scientific personnel. The operation was devastating and humiliating. Here's the thing about military humiliation. It doesn't fade quietly. It either leads to reform or revenge. Israeli intelligence believes Iran is now more motivated to rebuild than it was before the war. Not reckless yet, not urgent enough for immediate strikes, but moving slowly, quietly. Which brings us back to the USS Abraham Lincoln. Because when Israel starts warning Washington, when Iran starts preparing escape plans, and when US carriers go dark, those are not random events, they are signals. And signals usually come before decisions. At this moment, intelligence estimates suggest the probability of an immediate Iranian attack is less than 50%. But here's the problem. After October 7, 2023, Israel's tolerance for risk changed. No one is willing to just assume it's an exercise anymore, one source admitted. And in a region where assumptions have started wars before, that hesitation matters. So the world waits. Iran watches. Israel calculates. The US positions its forces. And somewhere in the dark waters of the region, a massive carrier moves without announcing itself. That silence is not comforting. We'll dig deeper into what could trigger the next strike, how Russia and China factor into this equation, and what a collapse or survival of Iran's regime would mean for the entire region and beyond. Because if this explodes, it won't stay local. And history tells us it never does. There's a moment in every crisis when governments stop pretending everything is normal. They still hold press briefings. They still issue statements. They still say words like exercise, routine, defensive posture. But behind the scenes, something changes. You start seeing drills at unusual times, missile tests announced with too much urgency, defense councils releasing statements that sound more like warnings than reassurances. That's where Iran is right now. On January 4th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps carried out missile and air defense exercises across multiple major cities, including Tehran and Shiraz. This wasn't random. This wasn't ceremonial. This was anxiety made visible. These drills came days after Netanyahu's private discussions with Donald Trump, where one topic dominated: Iran is rebuilding. Not hypothetically, not someday, now. According to Israeli intelligence, Iran has begun laying the groundwork to reconstruct missile infrastructure damaged in last year's strikes. And while nuclear enrichment still matters, missiles are the real clock ticker, because nuclear programs take time to hide. Missiles just need fuel, coordinates, and orders. Strategically, early 2026 sits in a dangerous window. Why? Because all the drivers for conflict are still alive. Nuclear verification disputes, missile reconstitution, proxy forces across the region, domestic political incentives in Israel, Iran, and the US. And perhaps most importantly, leaders have already talked about round two. Once that language enters the system, it doesn't disappear. It becomes permission. Despite last year's devastating strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, Iran still retains significant stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. That's not speculation. That's coming straight from public reporting tied to IAEA board discussions in November 2025. Inspectors are still demanding full access. Verification remains incomplete. Stockpile accounting is unresolved, and in national security thinking, uncertainty is not neutral. Uncertainty is danger. When leaders believe they don't fully understand what their adversary has or how fast they can rebuild, decision timelines shrink. That's when miscalculations happen. Now let's talk about Donald Trump's role in this. According to reporting, Netanyahu presented Trump with 4 attack scenarios earlier in 2025. Israel strikes alone. Israel strikes with minimal US support, full joint operations, a US-led assault. Trump chose diplomacy, at least publicly. But here's the part that matters. While talks were given a chance, intelligence sharing never stopped. Operational planning never stopped. Strike readiness never stopped. As one insider put it bluntly, If talks fail, we're ready to go. And while Trump spoke publicly about preferring negotiations, Israeli officials quietly met U.S. envoys, leaked just enough information to shape expectations, and, crucially, worked to lull Iran into complacency. That's not diplomacy, that's preparation with a poker face. On January 6th, Iran's newly formed Defense Council released a statement that should make everyone pause. They said Iran reserves the right to respond before an attack if it detects clear signs of threat. Read that again, not after. Before. In military language, that's an implicit endorsement of preemptive action. They also warned that statements or actions beyond rhetoric could be treated as hostile acts. In other words now carry weight. This tells us something critical. Iran believes it might not get a warning shot next time. And when countries think the first blow is coming, they start thinking about striking first. According to multiple reports, tensions peaked on a late Wednesday night when the Israeli Air Force prepared for what could have been a US-led strike on Iran. Aircraft were ready, coordination was underway. Then, at the last moment, Trump pulled the plug. Why? Netanyahu reportedly asked for a delay. Israel wasn't ready enough. That detail matters, because it tells us two things. This wasn't theoretical planning. Israel is actively buying time to prepare better. Since then, Israel has quietly improved missile interception capacity, increased reserve mobilization, and refined deployment of defense systems. The Israeli military chief of staff publicly stated the IDF is prepared to employ unprecedented offensive power against any threat. That's not chest thumping. That's deterrence messaging. Now let's talk about the part most people underestimate: the economy. Military pressure alone doesn't collapse regimes. Economic collapse creates the dry wood. US sanctions, renewed maximum pressure, and isolation have severed Iran's remaining economic lifelines. Inflation is brutal. Unemployment is rising. Living standards are falling fast. Protests are spreading across more than 20 provinces. And here's where the Moscow contingency becomes dangerous. Because when soldiers believe the regime is eternal, they obey. When they believe leadership might flee, they hesitate. One IRGC commander doesn't need ideology to crack. He just needs doubt. Why should I order my men to shoot? The logic goes, if I'll be left behind to face the tribunal. That's how loyalty dies. This may be the most destabilizing part of all. For 47 years, the Islamic Republic survived by selling one unbreakable idea: we are inevitable. They survived war with Iraq. They survived mass protests. They survived uprisings. Why? Because even their enforcers believed the supreme leader would stand and die on Iranian soil. But the Moscow contingency shatters that belief. It transforms the supreme leader from a messianic figure into a politician checking the exits. For a theocracy, that's not just embarrassing. It's theological collapse. Once inevitability disappears, fear loses its grip. Even if Khamenei stays, another problem looms. Who comes next? There is no credible, unifying successor with broad legitimacy. Power struggles inside the elite are already visible, with pragmatists calling for restraint and hardliners demanding brute force. President Masoud Pezeshkian's recent calls for a kind approach toward protesters aren't softness, they're panic management. When regimes start talking about kindness, it's because force is no longer enough. Yes, Moscow appears the obvious destination. Russia has a long record of sheltering fallen allies. But here's the truth many miss. Russia offers asylum, not rescue. It will take fleeing leaders. It will sell weapons. It will provide diplomatic cover. But it will not send troops to save a collapsing Iranian regime. We've seen this pattern in Venezuela, in Syria, even partially in Iran itself last year. Moscow protects its interests, not its friends. Here's where everything converges. Iranian commanders are quietly thinking about exits. Israel is refining strike packages. The US Navy is repositioned and silent. Protests threaten regime stability, and uncertainty dominates every calculation. This is the most dangerous moment in the Middle East since June 2025. The next move, by Iran, Israel, or the US, will determine whether 2026 becomes a year of regional war or regime collapse. And history tells us something uncomfortable. Wars don't usually begin with speeches. They begin with silence, drills, escape plans, and leaders who believe time is running out. What do you think happens next? Does Iran hold together? Does Israel strike again? Or does this end the way so many regimes do? Quietly, suddenly, and from the inside? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this analysis valuable, support the work by liking the video. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. because this story is far from over.